Gavin Barwell.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. As the Right Honourable Member for Leicester East predicted, and I'd like to thank him for his kind words, I'd like to focus my remarks today on one particular measure in one particular bill in the Queen's Speech, which I have been lobbying for a number of months, and I hope other members of the House will forgive me for focusing on that one issue. On the 26th of June 2010, my constituent Lillian Groves, a 14-year-old girl, was killed outside her home by a driver under the influence of drugs. It subsequently transpired that he was driving a car that wasn't licensed in his name, uninsured, at 43 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour zone. A half-smoked joint of cannabis was found on the dashboard. Sadly, the police didn't take a drug test swiftly. It was only after Lillian had actually passed away in hospital some 9 hours later that his blood was tested. Cannabis was found in his blood. He subsequently admitted to having taken cannabis, but the CPS concluded that the level was not enough. The family were never told what the level was, but were told the level was not enough to warrant the more serious charge of causing death while driving under the influence of drugs. So he was charged with causing death by careless driving and causing death while driving uninsured. He was sentenced on the 7th of July 2011 to just 8 months in prison and was released after 4 months. He lives...
The Honourable Gentleman give way.
I will very briefly. I'm conscious other members wish to speak.
It's a quick point, but why can't we, when these people do this sort of thing, ban them from driving for life?
Well, I think the issue here is about what the offence is that's been committed in changing the law, and I'll come on to explain how the Queen's Speech is doing just that in a second. He was sentenced to 8 months, as I said, and released after 4 months. He lives locally, so the family have to confront the fact that they will, from time to time, meet this person who has never apologised to them, who has caused the death of their daughter, may meet them as they go about their business in their local community. Lillian's parents, Gary and Natasha, her aunt and her uncle, came to see me at one of my surgeries in the autumn after the sentence had been handed out, shortly before this individual was due to be released from prison. I cannot tell the House how much of a high regard I hold this family in. I think for anyone, as a parent myself, for any parent to have to go through the tragedy of losing a child and not to be consumed by bitterness, but to focus on how some kind of positive change can come out of such a terrible event, has to be commended by all people. And I'd also like to commend the Croydon Advertiser, and in particular their journalist Gareth Davies, who's worked with the family and designed a campaign for what they call Lillian's Law. It's actually a package of measures to try and address the problem with 4 elements. First of all, a change in the law. At the moment, it is an offence to drive under the influence of drugs, but the law isn't the same as in relation to drink driving. There isn't a set level of drug in your system above which you're held to be incapable of driving. And therefore the prosecution have to prove that your driving was affected by the drugs in your system, and that isn't an easy thing to do. So the first thing is a change in the law. The second thing is essentially the licensing of equipment similar to a alcohol test, a breathalyzer, that can be used either at the roadside or in police stations. The third thing is a tougher sentencing policy to people that commit these crimes. And the fourth element is a series of random tests similar to that which we had in the 1980s in relation to drink driving, to get across the message that A, it is unacceptable to drive under the influence of drugs, and B, that if you do so, you are liable to get caught. When the family came to speak to me, I did a lot of research, and I saw, to be fair, that the previous government was aware of this problem and had looked at it and tried to see how it might be addressed, but things had really got bogged down in the sand, and there were a number of different government departments involved. So I decided to go straight to the top, and I raised the issue in this chamber at Prime Minister's questions. And the Prime Minister met with the Groves family, took up their case, and has worked with the Ministry of Justice and the Home Office and the Department of Transport to ensure that the first key element of this package, a change in the law, is being included in the Crime and Courts Bill, which is part of the Queen's Speech. I'd just like at this point to pay tribute to a couple of other people. My honourable friend, the member for Christchurch, has tried to pursue this issue previously via a private member's bill. And I'd also like to thank my honourable friend for Eastbourne and my honourable friend for Orpington, who have members of the extended Groves family as their constituents and have supported the campaign. In yesterday's debate on the Queen's Speech, the leader of the opposition perhaps understandably, quoted remarks by my honourable friend, the member for Bedfordshire, saying of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor that they're two arrogant posh boys who show no remorse, no contrition, and no passion to understand the lives of others. I'm very disappointed that my honourable friend said those words. I can understand why the Leader of the Opposition quoted them, but I hope he doesn't personally believe them, and I hope members opposite don't personally believe them. My experience in this House is that members on all sides that I have met have a passion to understand the lives of others and to change our country for the better. And when we try and pretend that the motives of people that disagree with us about the means of doing so are malign, we actually do our politics as a whole a disservice.
Yeah.
The experience of the Groves family, when they came to see the Prime Minister and met him at number 10 Downing Street, was not of someone that didn't have a passion to understand the lives of others, or, as the Leader of the Opposition said yesterday, someone who was standing up for the wrong people. They actually probably met one of the very few members of this House who could personally understand the experience they had been through in losing a child, someone who took a great deal of time to listen to what they had to say, to understand the issue, and then took their cause up. So, on a personal level, on their behalf, I would like to thank the Prime Minister for what he's done, and I would like to address to my honourable friends on the front bench some detailed questions about where we go from here. I understand that in relation to a testing device at the roadside, there are devices that are already under testing at the moment, and perhaps ministers could give some update about how those tests are going. In relation to devices at police stations. And I wonder if they could also give an indication of when they might be in a position to begin tests of devices for use at the roadside. There is, I understand, an expert panel that is looking at the moment at the issue about what are the levels that should be set for each individual drug, both illegal drugs and some prescription drugs, which clearly it is not safe to take in significant quantities and then drive a car. So I wonder if we could have an update on the progress that panel is making. And I would also be very interested to hear what the proposed sentencing policy is going to be in relation to the new offence that is being set out in the bill. I've just got about 2.5 minutes left, Mr. Deputy Speaker, so I'd just like to end by making a few comments about things that the Shadow Home Secretary had to say on the issue of police cuts and some of the questions that she fielded from this side of the House. She was trying to make the contention that members on this side of the House don't know or understand the pressures that the police force are under. In relation to my own Borough Command Unit, I spent 3 days during the ludicrously long holidays this House has actually work shadowing police officers in Croydon. I spent a day with a Safer Neighbourhood team, a day with a response team, and a day with the robbery squad in Croydon. I saw for myself the enormous pressures that they're under, and I heard from officers about the concerns they have about the combined effect of a pay freeze, pension reform, and the Windsor Review recommendations. So it certainly isn't the case that members on this side are unsympathetic to the case that police officers make, nor ungrateful for the huge amount of work that they've done, particularly in my constituency, in the wake of the riots. But we do find it very difficult when members opposite seek to avoid any responsibility for the financial mess that the country finds itself in. It isn't the fault, the level of the deficit that this government inherited is not solely the fault of the last Labour government. They had to intervene in a recession, we understand that. But the last Labour government did make a contribution to the scale of that deficit. And the Shadow Home Secretary was asked in detail if the opposition's proposal is for a cut of £1 billion in police funding, where she would find the other £1 billion. And she tried two arguments. First of all, she said the scale of cuts the coalition is proposing go beyond what Labour would do. But that is not actually Labour's policy. Labour's policy is that the structural deficit should be dealt with over 2 parliaments rather than just one. That implies the same level of cuts over a longer period of time. The second point she made was that growth was the answer to this. The problem was that the government's policies on growth were failing. Now, we all want to see growth, but actually growth doesn't deal with a structural deficit. By definition, a structural deficit is one that remains whatever level of economic growth you get. So the challenge to the opposition front bench is still there, which is there is a structural deficit to be dealt with, the amount is agreed between both parties, and if you don't support, the opposition don't support a particular level of cuts that the government is proposing, where would they find the money as an alternative? And until they come up with an answer to that question, Mr. Deputy Speaker, they will have no credibility.